All rights reserved with Yolanda Taylor, the community lawyer on Choice FM.
Welcome to another episode of All Rights Reserved with Yolanda Taylor, the community lawyer. This is a place where we talk about our rights as it relates to politics, democracy, housing, restorative justice, and maybe even some current trends. Again, I'm Yolanda Taylor, the community lawyer. Now, why do I call myself a community lawyer? Well, a community lawyer is a traditional lawyer, but a traditional lawyer that goes, I want to say, over beyond the call of duty, because as a community lawyer, we look at legal issues through a community's perspective, because we realize that what's legal may not always be just, right? Martin Luther King said that before I did. And we also realize that some issues are often social and political in nature. So an example of that will be looking at criminal justice reform, looking at the unaffordable housing market, looking at, is it just for someone to be evicted from their long-term home? They've been paying the rent, they've been great tenants, but all of a sudden their rent increases. Is it just for people to be economically evicted? So a community lawyer takes a problem-solving approach, again, to legal issues that might be legal, but it's not just, and they also may be a little complex because there's some political and policy issues there that need to be resolved. So wanted to tell you that about myself, and if you have any questions, you can go to www.lawandcommunity.com to read more about me. So let's get into this. Last week, we were talking about democracy, and under democracy, we were talking about a principle called the rule of law. I talked a lot about that, and so I'm not going to do that this time, but I will just recap for my audience what the rule of law means. The rule of law is a principle which all persons, institutions, and entities are accountable to the laws. So in other words, no one individual and no corporation is above the law. So if you want to remember what the rule of law is, the easy takeaway is no one is above the law. We all are held accountable to the law. The issue that we're facing, though, today in this country is that you have two major political parties, the Democrat Party and the Republican Party. We are fighting for the same thing, right? The same thing is that we feel that, democracy means that a government is for the people, by the people. So both parties are fighting for democracy. We just have different means of getting there, and we have a different understanding of who the government is for. There are some people in this country that feel the government is just for them, their issues, or people that look like them, or people that have their concerns. But, then there are other folks who feel like, the government is for anyone that falls under the umbrella, the shelter, the refuge of the American government, that, the government is for the people, by the people. And that means all people, not people that look a certain way or belong to a certain group of folks. So let's go back to 2020. I know we don't want to go back to 2020. A lot was going on. George Floyd protests were occurring. There was a national pandemic. We were concerned about our health. But what else happened in 2020 was the 2020 elections, right? The 2020 election where Joe Biden won against former President Donald Trump. That election was real close. And all this plays into democracy, because I want to talk about an issue that we all are concerned about, and that is whether or not our vote counts. I hear that from a lot of people. I'm not going to vote because my vote don't count anyway. Well, let's unpack that here. Again, in the 2020 election, the vote was very close. Biden won that election with 306 electoral votes, which was like 51.3% of the popular vote. And Donald Trump won with 232 electoral votes, which was 46.9% of the popular vote. And according to a think tank group called the Pew Research Center, that was a very small margin. It seems big, but in the grand scheme of things, that was a small margin. And that's why today, both campaigns are saying this is going to be a close race, because that's how close it is in America as far as the differences and what people believe. I've heard people say it's 50-50. We're a 50% blue state. We're probably a 50% red state. If you've ever heard that, that's what that's coming from the 2020 election. So, of course, after he won by this small margin in the grand scheme of things. There were allegations of election fraud, and there were election challenges, as well as what we will say an insurrection. An insurrection actually happened as well, right? Of course, they may say, based on their definition of democracy, that it was an exercise by the people to overthrow a government that wasn't working for the people. But these claims, these election fraud claims, were rejected across the country by at least 86 judges. And even the justices on the U.S. Supreme Court determined that there was no election fraud. So this led to about 50 court case losses by Donald Trump and his supporters. And that's an article that I researched from the Washington Post, because I had to go back to remember all these things that happened in 2020. At that time, though, there was a quote by current President Joe Biden, and he stated this: "In this battle for the soul of America, democracy prevailed. We, the people, voted. Faith in our institutions held. The integrity of our elections remains intact. And now it's time to turn the page as we've done throughout history." So, again, we are still fighting for the soul of America. We're still fighting for democracy to prevail. We, the people, should vote in this election, and our faith in our institutions, if we do what we're supposed to do, should hold. But our integrity is what we're trying to remain intact. So there's a lot at stake in this national election come November. So I thought, again, that this will be a great topic under democracy. It's just to unpack, like, do our vote really count? So I'm going to talk about a complex topic real quick, and that's the electoral college system. Do y'all understand what the electoral college system is and how it works? Kind of complicated. Well, let's just say this. The electoral college system is a process. It's not a college. It's a process, right, that was laid down in the U.S. Constitution, and one that's become standard practice over the decades, right? But there are two rules, right? There are two rules, I should say, that govern the electoral college process. It's the one that was put in there by the founders of the U.S. Constitution. What it says there in the U.S. Constitution is one rule. And the other rule, again, is one that has become a standard practice over the decades. So under the U.S. Constitution, each state gets one electoral vote for each senator that state has and each representative it has in Congress. Since every state, no matter how big or how small, gets two senators, small states, have greater weight in the electoral college than they would have if we were just judging them based on their population alone. So in a way, it's kind of like trying to make things fair. You have large states, you have small states. What's the way, our founders were thinking, how can we make this fair? So regardless if you're small or large, you can kind of like get the same weight because every state gets two senators, right? Regardless of your population size. Second, all but two states use what's called a plurality winner-take-all system to award their presidential electors. That's what it's called. So whoever receives the most votes in all but two states wins all its electoral votes. And winning a state, therefore, by a 33 percentage point, as Biden did, maybe in the state of Massachusetts, it really doesn't get you any closer to the White House than winning it by 0.3 points. So, so it doesn't matter how much you win it by, it just matters that you win it, the electoral votes. In contrast, though, there are two states that I say that do not have the winner-take-all system. Those two states are Maine and Nebraska. In those two states, though, candidates get electoral votes for winning the statewide vote, plus one for each congressional district that they win. So how many, we're looking at North Carolina, you might be wondering, well, how many electoral votes does the state of North Carolina has? Well, we have 2 senators in Congress and we have 14 representatives in Congress. So we have a total of 16 electors. And I don't know if you guys know this interesting fact that the 2 senators that the whole state of North Carolina has in Congress are Republican. And that is Ted Budd and Tom Tillis. So Senator Ted Budd and Senator Tom Tillis are the senators from North Carolina. And we have a skew of like 14 representatives. I'm not going to get into all of those, but 7 of those representatives that we have in Congress are Democrat. And I believe maybe a little under 7 are Republicans. I forgot to count that amount. But I think we have more Democratic representatives than we do Republican representatives based on my recollection. So when we say again that my vote doesn't count, it does, just in a different or maybe a more roundabout way, because your vote determines how many electors your candidate may get. So it's important to vote because you want your candidate to win your state, right? And whether they win your state determines if they get closer to that magical number that they need to become president. And they need 270 electoral votes to become president. So I thought that was something very interesting to talk about under democracy. Recapping the rule of law, what democracy is, the different views and perspectives on democracy, and also unpacking our electoral college system. And as I mentioned before, democracy naturally flows into politics. So under this topic, let's talk about what does it mean to be a fair or to have a fair and free election. You may hear that a lot, that we need to have a free and fair election. What does that mean, as a voter? What are these talking heads or these political analysts or people like me, what are we talking about? Well, again, we have, for the majority, I know there are people in the middle, I know that there are independent voters, but for the majority, there are like 2 parties, Republican and Democrat, right? So again, you have these 2 sides saying that their definition of what's free and what's fair is different, right? You have one side, I will say, namely the Democrats, they are concerned about things like voter suppression, voter intimidation occurring at the ballot. What is voter intimidation? Voter intimidation could be, if you are a naturalized citizen, but you have immigrant, family members with you and you're trying to vote. Intimidation could be, maybe a police officer, being there watching you. I don't know. Or it could be, someone making you feel uncomfortable as you enter the polling site. It could be someone being aggressive, trying to make you vote for a particular candidate. They are not within the boundaries. They have to be within the 50 feet distance from the entrance of the polling site. It's called the buffer zone. So they may not be in their correct boundary landmark that's required. They could be closer to the door, and you're just there to vote. You're not there to be harassed. I've had voters actually tell me this because I do election protection work. I volunteer as an attorney and I do that work. But the Republicans, feel, so that's what the Democrats feel. They feel like things like that, voter intimidation, excessive long lines, misinformation, provisional ballots. Maybe someone's given a provisional ballot over a real ballot. A provisional ballot is a ballot that can be objected to and rejected later post-election. So when you vote, you really want to get a real ballot and not a provisional ballot because, again, post-election, there's this process called canvassing where these provisional ballots are counted and then objections can be made, right? And a lot of people don't know this, so I will unpack that later. But these are things that the Democratic Party, this is what that party is worried about, and this is why they feel like there's a possibility there won't be fair and free elections if these tactics and shenanigans are occurring. Now, the Republicans, and I'm not really here to make their argument, but as a lawyer, I like to see both sides. The Republicans think that a free and fair election will not happen, mostly because they believe that there's election fraud occurring. They believe that dead people are voting. They believe that people who they call illegal immigrants, I call, people who are undocumented citizens, but they call them illegal immigrants. They believe that people who are not United States citizens are voting in our elections. And again, they believe that dead people are voting in elections. There have been claims that they busted up in people's homes, looking for a person that voted and they claimed the person was dead. So they have all this election fraud, assumptions occurring in their heads. And I say in their heads because there hasn't really been any real data or real proof that election fraud occurred in 2020 or that it occurred in our primaries or that it occurred in our municipal elections, which were last year. And they're determined, I feel, to win by any means necessary. And I'm saying this because, again, the fraud has not been proven. And as an attorney, I'm like, prove it. Where's the data? I've even sat in public hearings around some of these new election laws because last session, and I'm talking about the 2023 session, there was a skew of new election laws that our Republican-led General Assembly put in place. And it was all around this presumption that there is election fraud. And not one of them in proposing the bills, could say that they had data or real evidence of election fraud occurring, right? There may have been maybe 7 people, that there were some inappropriate issues around them being able to vote that I read, in the past that have occurred. But to actually skew an election, to actually cost former President Donald Trump the 2020 election, no, none of that was proven. And as I stated, judges and justices on the U.S. Supreme Court found that no election fraud had taken place in that national election. But as a result of this, this debate between, what's a fair and free election, there is some political drama, y'all, some political drama that's going on right now between the State Board of Elections and, again, our Republican-led General Assembly. And the General Assembly is just another word for our legislative branch of government here in North Carolina. Well, first, before I get into the new drama that happened this week on Monday, let me talk about the past drama that happened. Okay, y'all ready for this? Last year, the old drama was that they passed a bill called the Uniform, well, not take it back, not passed. They drafted a bill. I got to be careful with my language here. They drafted a bill in 2023 called the Uniform Heroes Voting Act. The intent of that bill was to make sure police officers can vote in their uniforms, right? I'm just like, this is similar to the Parents' Bill of Rights. Parents already have rights. I know I have rights when it comes to my child in school. I have rights to talk to the principal. I have rights to find out about her education. I have rights to object to maybe something she's reading. I already had these rights, right? Well, police officers already had the right to vote, but this bill is giving an assumption that maybe they did not. This is the actual language in that drafted bill from 2023. It didn't go anywhere. It didn't pass, but it caused a stir, right, to the point that the North Carolina State Board of Elections had to write a response to it, right? Because basically you're sitting here accusing the North Carolina State Board of Education of putting in processes or drafting guidance or memos that will prevent a police officer from voting. But the bill stated, no person seeking to vote may be refused entry into the voting place due to that person being a law enforcement officer, first responder, correctional officer, a member of the military, and appearing in the uniform required by that person's employer. Nothing in this subsection shall be construed to allow denial of entry into the voting place to attire when such denial is otherwise prohibited by law. So again, are you wasting taxpayers' dollars when we send you to the General Assembly to just come up with bills with no evidence behind it? I mean, they did not provide any supporting evidence that there were police officers that were denied the right to vote. They even threw in first responders, paramedics. Was that proven? I mean, what is the controversy? Is this manufactured? Some people say that some of this stuff is manufactured controversies just so that they can skew the election in their favor. But to be a little fair, I will say it may have been drafted because it was a memo, as I stated previously, by the North Carolina State Board of Elections that gave guidance around police officers being at the polls, right? It was just around saying that, you cannot police people when they're voting, right? In other words, you either got to be voting if you're a police officer as a citizen. You either got to be there because you're voting, because you're a citizen and you can vote. Or you have ID this year, you can vote, or you've been called by someone to be there because maybe something's happening at the poll. Maybe there's disruption. Maybe there's a fight. Maybe there's something that needs the police. But you can't be there proactively policing like y'all do in Southeast Raleigh. You can't just be there, right? So that's basically what the memo was about. You can't be there in a way or have such a presence that you make people feel intimidated or they feel suppressed to vote because they feel like you're watching them or monitoring them, and you weren't even called by officials to be there. You're not even there voting. So the State Board of Election had to respond to that bill, and so they did. They updated their guidance and to say that the guidance that they've updated this year was prepared in collaboration with the State Board of Elections, the North Carolina Sheriff's Association, and the North Carolina Association of Chiefs of Police to help law enforcement navigate and balance its role in maintaining peaceful and orderly elections because they want to give some guidance. Okay, we want y'all to be able to balance your role when you're called and you have to balance and make sure it's a peaceful election versus, it looking as if you're trying to intimidate voters. So they stated that law enforcement plays an important role in North Carolina's elections by helping to ensure voters can freely have access to voting. This reference guide was created because of that, but officers should be prepared. We want the police to be prepared to respond promptly if something's unsafe, if someone has a gun, or if there's some kind of disruption at the poll sites. We don't want any threats to the peace while we're just trying to exercise our right to vote. But they should, according to this guidance, avoid the appearance again of monitoring or intimidating voters or policing the polls. And when contacted by election officials, officers should respond to a voting site as promptly as possible. And they may wear their uniforms if their agency permits them to vote while in uniform. So they put it back on the agency. If your agency permits you to vote in a uniform, that's fine. If you're there to vote, that's fine. So it was a made-up controversy, right? So that was the old drama. The new drama that happened this Monday was that the Republican National Convention and other GOP officials accused North Carolina of allowing 250,000 people to register to vote improperly. They accused North Carolina of allowing 250,000 people to register to vote improperly. Now, the State Board of Election had a clap back. Okay? And they say that's false. Well, they really wanted to say that's a D-lie. But instead they said that's false, and that the solution that the Republicans were offering was a violation of federal law. And if they were to implement their solution, now I'm gonna get to their solution, it will be a violation of federal law. So what did they do? They sued. The Republican Party leaders in North Carolina, or state and national, I should say, Republican Party leaders have sued the North Carolina State Board of Elections, a new lawsuit that came out, like I said, as of Monday, after the State Board of Elections criticized them, right? For pretending to sue or I guess saying that they were going to sue. But the board has called this lawsuit categorically false, and that the allegations about potential for voter fraud are false as well. So this complaint that was filed on Monday is a second lawsuit making election integrity, and that's what all these laws that they were working on last year, in 2023, when people need affordable housing, where, other issues are going on, where we needed, universal health care, or not universal health care, expansion of Medicaid, I should say. That's too liberal to say universal right now. But, an expansion of Medicaid, things that we really needed, the schools that need to be funded, they were very engrossed in creating these election integrity bills all last session in 2023. But this is the second lawsuit making election integrity related claims against the State Board of Election, I should say. And and what they're doing really, guess who they're targeting? We know who they're targeting. I already mentioned dead people and immigrants, but they are saying, they call into question whether large numbers of immigrants are illegally voting in North Carolina. Again, this is echoing the false claims of former President Donald Trump, the same ones he made in 2016 and the 2020 elections. But again, like I said, the State Board of Election officials are saying that these claims are based on a skewed version of the facts, and that the lawsuit's proposed solution in and of itself is illegal because there's a certain amount of time. Because what the solution is, they want them to purge voters. And I believe the number of voters that they want the State Board of Election to purge, based on this lawsuit file, they seek a purge of more than 225,000 voters from the rolls in North Carolina. In other words, they want them to remove 225,000 voters from the ability to vote, like from the rolls, from the registration rolls. They want to remove these voters, right? And if you look back in 2020, Trump won North Carolina by less than 75,000 votes. So is this like purge of 225,000 voters? Is that a calculated number? Is that a number trying to skew North Carolina in favor of one particular national candidate? But anyway, now there were some issues, maybe regarding like matching information in the database, but they offer no evidence that there are immigrants that are illegally registered to vote, right? But this is what they're alleging. And I guess some people just feel like they can make allegations without support or data to back it up. But that is the drama that is unfolding. And like I said, this second lawsuit is something new. I don't know what's going to happen, but the State Board of Election is saying that it's illegal. It will violate I guess, federal law because the purge has to happen within a certain amount of time before elections. And, we're like, I think we're less than 75 days before elections now, right? So according to federal law, this purge cannot happen right now because we're so close to the elections. But they don't care. They want the State Board of Election, I guess, to violate federal law and purge 225,000 voters from the registration rolls. So that's the drama, y'all, with politics in North Carolina. That's why it's important to understand that your vote does count, right? It does count nationally and locally. We got to understand these issues. I'm going to take a break and we'll be back to talk about housing, y'all.
All rights reserved with Yolanda Taylor, the community lawyer on Choice FM.
Hey guys, we are back and let's talk about housing, y'all. I hope I dropped a few gems in that last session that we talked and unpacked the electoral college process. And we talked about the tension and the drama between our Republican-led General Assembly and our North Carolina State Board of Elections. But now we're going to just dovetail that into some of the things I really think our legislative branch should be focusing on. And that is housing, y'all. I want to talk to those of you who have been waiting to purchase a home, but the interest rates are too high. And I also want to talk about maybe this national lawsuit that you may have heard of, or maybe you haven't heard of it. If you haven't, let me bring you on to what has happened in 2024. Well, earlier this year, a Missouri jury found the National Association of Realtors, that's the professional association that a lot of realtors are a part of, or members of, but they found that the National Association of Realtors and other real estate companies were guilty of what they call anti-competition trade practices that led to the inflation of home sale commissions for the people in Missouri. But even though it started in Missouri, it has had like statewide industry changes or national changes, right? Because they were basically saying that they had a practice where they basically were charging, these high commission fees. And I don't know if you recently bought a home. I don't know if you can recall what your realtor charged you as a commission fee, but they had a monopoly. In other words, there was no negotiation there for sellers or buyers. But the jury order in that case that the National Association of Realtors and other real estate companies, one being Keller Williams and RE/MAX, the jury ordered that they pay $1.8 billion in damages. They, of course, appealed. They were like, we don't got $1.8 billion. No, we appealed this case. So they appealed the decision, but eventually decided to resolve it via a settlement. And a settlement doesn't mean that one side is guilty, or the other side was right. They just probably didn't want to fight anymore. Maybe the attorney fees were high. They decided, let's resolve this outside of court. So in the negotiated settlement, the National Association of Realtors and these other companies agreed to pay $418 million. That's a huge difference. $418 million versus $1.8 billion. So now you see the advantages of sometimes selling something. They probably said, well, I don't know if we appeal this that you're going to get a appeal judge to award you $1.8 billion, even though a jury did. You may not get the same amount awarded. So, but we will agree to just voluntarily pay $418 million. And that settlement, guys, just went into effect on August 17th, this month. And I stated that even though it started in Missouri, the settlement has industry-wide changes. So how does that affect you? If you're someone that hopes to one day purchase a home, or you've been waiting for the right time to purchase a home, and so why does the settlement matter? It matters because now, before your friend, the realtor, or anyone who's a realtor, before they can even show you a house, you got to sign a contract. That's one of the things. Buyers must now enter into a contract with the agent before that agent can even show them any properties. Now, I have some friends who are realtors. I have one friend said, oh my God, she's panicking because she's never done that before and she's trying to adapt to the changes. And then I have another friend who's a realtor. She's like, girl, we did this as practice anyway. We will always make people who are interested in our services sign a contract before we show them anything. That was just her best practice, right? But all realtors were not doing that. And there were some states that kind of like require that, but not all states require that. But now nationally, it's required for an agent who's a member of the National Association of Realtors, and they have like 1.5 million members in America. It's required that they make their client sign a contract, buyers, I should say, sign a contract before they can show them any properties. So this contract is called a signed buyer representation agreement. And basically, as stated, it's a change that's probably going to impact at least 30 states because, like I said, there were some states that already require it. Also, as of August 17th, a second shift or change that has occurred as a result of this settlement regards the commission, the big commissions that they were getting. Prior to the settlement, realtors that were part of the National Association of Realtors were able to list properties, including offers of shared commissions within their local municipal listing services, or MLS. Have y'all ever heard of MLS? It's a database that realtors have access to, and they are able to see all the homes that went on the market that are for sale. They have like this special database. So that's called MLS. They can't list these commissions on MLS anymore. Also, this tool, again, it allowed these real estate professionals to view and share information regarding property listings. And sometimes the suspicion was that maybe realtors were only steering their clients to sellers that offer to pay their commission or offer a higher percentage. So, I mean, the impact to a buyer would be, I want to see all the houses. I don't want to just see the houses based on whether or not you're going to get paid more money. You know, you have a duty to me to show me houses that are good for me, not just based on your commission. So that's the argument, just to break that down for you a little bit. But, and this also led, you know, I mean, these commission fees vary, like I said, but it led to most sellers, because the sellers felt like they had to compete. If they knew that other sellers were offering, let's say 6%, they felt like they needed to offer 6% of the home sales price and commission fees, right? So usually, you know, when you see a commission of 6%, 3% is going to the agent, and then the other 3% may go to the buyer's agent, right? So 3% goes to the seller agent, 3% goes to the buyer agent. But the issue was that, you know, sellers weren't able to negotiate these commission fees, and they were paying them almost every time, typically, right? But starting on the 17th of this month, they can't advertise these offers of compensation. They're no longer allowed to do this on this database called MLS. And while sellers and their agents can still offer to pay a buyer's agent fee or commission, this must happen via outside negotiations, right? So basically, it's allowing them to negotiate. You don't have to say 6% anymore, and you don't have to worry about other people putting that they're going to pay 6%. You don't have to feel like you're in this competition, right? Which I won't even say it was no competition. So that's the whole issue involving this, that they had a monopoly, that there was no free competition and there was no negotiation rights here. So now but sellers can say, I'm not paying the commission. I think I'm going to pay my agent's commission, and maybe the buyer should pay their agent's commission. Some people are still saying, I'm not going to say who they are, but some people have told me that they might just still deal with those sellers who are willing to pay. And I don't think that's right. I still don't think that's right, because if I hire you to be my agent, I want you to show me all the houses, that may fit my needs, not just the ones where someone's trying to pay you more money. I know it's hard out there, y'all, but come on, y'all, let's have some moral and ethics here. But the buyer can still negotiate and pay their agent's fee out of pocket, or buyers can actually go without an agent. They can manage their own transactions if they feel comfortable or smart enough or crafty enough to do it. I mean, there are a lot of homes that are for sale by sellers, and sometimes buyers do negotiate it on their own. I know I found my own house. I had a realtor, though. I found my own house, though, and I think about it like, this woman got paid all this money, and I actually found the house. I did the work. I mean, with Zillow and all these places out there, you could practically find your own house, right? You know that, right? But and I'm sorry if you're a realtor, I'm not trying to cut into your money. I think you guys do bring expertise to the table, and you take those hard exams. Those exams are hard because there's a lot of legalese and legal stuff in there too. So if you feel like you need a realtor, get a realtor. But just know that you can negotiate, and just know if you're a seller, you don't technically have to pay the buyer's agent's fee. If you do, because you want a hands up and you want to get your house sold, maybe you will pay it, but you can negotiate what the fee is now. But the last change, and the biggest change that has happened, is that buyers and their agents, again, will need to negotiate this compensation directly before viewing homes. So buyers and their agents will need to negotiate this change or this fee before viewing homes, and they have to sign this contract. All right, so you may be asking, well, will this have any impact overall on housing costs or my ability as a person that's seeking to purchase my first home? I mean, how will this impact me if I'm a first-time home buyer? Maybe not too much. I hate to say it. If you're looking for a more affordable house in the Triangle or in a city that's more populated or popping or happening, for lack of better phrases, if you want to live in a popping town or a popping city, you're going to have like some high expenses when it comes to housing, because as of July 2024, the median sales price for a home in Wake County, North Carolina was $477,500. Median. So that means that it's right there in the middle. 50% of the homes are above that, 50% of the houses are below that. But the median sales price is $477,500. And that's the sales price. The median listing price, what sellers are listing it for, is $509,900. So the median listing price is $509,900. That's a 4.5% increase from last year. And if you really want to figure this out, if you were looking at the square footage of a house, right? The median price per square foot is $235. So let's take a house that's, not like a 3,000 square foot house, a reasonable house, maybe for 4 people. Let's look at a 2,100 square foot house. In today's market, that's considered large, right? Especially when people are paying, almost $1,400 a month for a studio or a 1-bedroom apartment. A 21 square foot house seems to be a McMansion almost this day and age. Well, if you multiply $235 times 2,100, a 2,100 square foot house now is going for $493,000. $493,500 to be exact. So wow. So if a 2,100 square foot home is going for almost $500,000, those of you who want like a 3,500 square foot home, you can only imagine. So sometimes that calculation is used in determining, amongst other things, like an appraisal by a bank, what to list your home for. Location is also a factor. Whether or not there were renovations or updates is a factor too. But that's just the base. That's the base number. So although, this settlement gives buyers more negotiation power, and I'm glad it does, because when you think about it, that commission fee goes into the overall cost of buying a home, because you have to pay that, and sometimes depending on if you're buying a existing home versus a new home, you might have closing costs depending on your credit score too. So all these factors go into play. Again, the average mortgage rate, although inflation is falling a bit, it's falling a bit, but as stated last episode, our inflation rates do not directly impact mortgage rates. There's an indirect impact, but not a direct impact. So inflation is falling, but it's not directly affecting the housing market. The average rate for a new 30-year mortgage is still nearly 7.1%. It has fallen, but it's still 7.1%, and that is high for those of us who remember maybe 5%. I have 3.3%, so I'm not going anywhere. I'm like buckle in for the long haul. My first time home has become my forever home, it seems like. But who knows? Lower rates, though, could give buyers more purchasing power. So even though these rates are falling, and I mean, I guess we just have to. If you really need a home and you really want a home, I guess we just have to accept this is the reality for today, right? And that the rates have been higher than 7.1%. So if you can afford to buy a house in this market, I mean, you might need to close your eyes and go for it, because, I mean, who knows what can happen tomorrow, right? But lower rates could give home buyers more purchasing power. However, it can also increase the competition for homes on the market, right? And we can see what we saw in, 2021, 2022, where there were these long lines wrapped around the corner for one house. So working with the agent, going back to that point, could be advantageous, since they know the market and they have deals that they know of with new construction homes. So that's just a gift I'm giving to my realtor friends. I don't want to feel like I was trying to take away your money and talking about the settlement. So that's housing, and that's the market. And I think that definitely dovetails into the topic of restorative justice. I didn't get a chance to talk about restorative justice last time, but restorative justice is like the cousin of reparations, sort of, right? It's not necessarily saying that you need to pay us for slavery, or because we are the descendants of formerly enslaved people, we deserve reparations. That's not what the argument's about. Restorative justice is more so like, we know that there was some discrimination that took place. We know that there was some unjust policy and laws that had the impact of discriminating against a particular group. So since we know that this stuff has happened currently or recently, and it doesn't date back to slavery, then what are some policies or some laws that we can put in place that can undo or mitigate that harm? So housing, again, it's a history of discrimination. I think this is low-hanging fruit for restorative justice, because it's clear. There's evidence, and I love evidence. There's evidence that there's been housing discrimination in America, right? It's complex. It's rooted in racist policies that do date back to slavery, but they happened way past slavery. I mean, I feel like my own father was a victim of housing discrimination. I believe that realtors steered him to one side of a particular town. Back in the 80s, when he moved from South Carolina to Wilson, North Carolina, he was only shown homes on one side of town. And that was an illegal practice by realtors, where they will actually steer you to certain communities, right? And the National Association of Realtors have apologized for that act. So it's documented. They admit that they acknowledge it, they apologize, but restorative justice is going beyond the apology. Thank you for apologizing. Now let's talk about what you're going to do to undo the harm that caused, housing discrimination. In addition to steering, there were things like redlining. A lot of you may have heard of redlining. This was done by the federal government. The Federal Housing Administration denied mortgage insurance to Black neighborhoods, which limited who could get mortgages and where homes could be built. The Federal Housing Administration believed that by allowing black people in white neighborhoods would decrease property values. Again, we have ignorance and unfounded facts leading policies and laws, even back then, even today. You know, this was disproven. In fact, it was found that black people moving into a white neighborhood actually increased the property taxes because black people desperately wanted it and they knew that in order to get it, they would have to pay more. They knew they would have to pay more for the house. So it actually increased the value of white neighborhoods and houses in white neighborhoods. But redlining also reinforced disparities or inequities by barring black families from assessing home ownership and limiting investment in majority black neighborhoods. So now when we look at how gentrification happens and how investors are able to come into black neighborhoods and buy cheap, like dirt cheap, and then build up all this wealth and $1 million investments are created by buying cheap. Why is our land value so cheap? Why is our neighborhood value so cheap? Because of this redlining and this discrimination, you know. And also when we look at the unaffordable housing market, that's what I like to call it, the unaffordable housing crisis, who's at the back of the bus of being able to obtain a home? There's data that proves that black families, black people, brown people, people of color are still at the back of the bus when it comes to home ownership opportunity. We are still the majority of renters, right? So what can a federal government do, or what can we do locally as a movement to ensure that there are statewide policies that acknowledge the inequities and the disparities that have occurred right here in the towns where we live? Like, this is not even just a national conversation. This is a local conversation. We need to be aware of that. And zoning rules have also, discriminated against African-American people. They segregated neighborhoods by wealth and income. Now tell me that's not happening today. Tell me that gentrification is not segregating neighborhoods by wealth and income. We see that low income, modest income renters, people, who can't afford the increased property taxes are being displaced by wealth being ejected in their neighborhoods in downtown Raleigh, southeast Raleigh, near Shaw University, near St. Augustine. I know it's happening in Greensboro. I've heard it's happening in Winston-Salem. It's happening in Charlotte for sure. This injection of wealth is displacing us because in addition to all these like housing discriminations, there's still a race wealth gap in America. We still have a group of people that get to hoard opportunity, right? In the grand scheme of things. So the Fair Housing Act of 1968, I talked about that, sought to undo some of that, but we need to think like when we're demanding like policies from the Harris campaign, or when we're demanding policies from Trump, or from our local elected candidates, what are some things that we feel can be put in place? Should there be money put in place to allow home ownership for a certain group of people? Well, to talk about that, there has been that, right? This is not like it hasn't been done before, because my last topic, which is related to this, has to do with J.D. Vance, who's running as the vice president candidate for the Donald Trump campaign. He stated on recently, like 2 weeks ago, on Face the Nation, that the Harris administration had handed out farm benefits to people based on skin color. He said, I think that's very disgraceful. I don't think we should say you get farm benefits if you're a black farmer. You don't get farm benefits if you're a white farmer. So the barrier that we have when we're talking about issues like restorative justice is that now we have people who feel like they're being discriminated against, the topic of reverse discrimination, right? So they're trying to say, well, you can't undo the harm because that would be discrimination against us. He didn't specify what USDA program he was talking about, but researchers pointed to that the USDA recently sent $2 billion in payments to 43,000 farmers who suffered discrimination when they applied previously for USDA farm loans. So Congress created the Discrimination Financial Assistance Program in 2022 after these lawsuits were filed, realizing that, farmers of color and black farmers were discriminated against. So now J.D. Vance doesn't like that. But that's an example of what our government can do to repair the harm, to repair the harm. And it's not a handout. It's what's due, honestly. Well, we are at the end of our hour, and I want to remind you what power is. And I got this definition from a group in DC. Next episode, I'm gonna give them credit. I can't think of the name right now, but power is the ability to create reality for ourselves, and that's through laws and policies. We can create our reality, and we can create that reality for others because that's what they do. Let's move in power, people. See you next time.
All rights reserved with Yolanda Taylor, the community lawyer on Choice FM.